everyone, it's Gabrielle here with you today again to bring you another new mixed media project. Today I'm doing a journal that I call the Tree of Life journal because that's the type of stencil I'm using on here. What I'm using is a journal that I bought from my local dollar store very inexpensively. What you're looking for is one of the ring binders so that you can open it, remove the cover and work on it, and then after put it back on. So what I'm doing right here is I'm covering the front cover with gesso. Here I'm using TCW white gesso. So what I'm doing next here is I'm cutting a piece of cheesecloth and I'm going to trim it about 1/4 or half an inch bigger than the actual size of the cover. So what I'm doing here is creating a textural background for my cover. I'm going to cut a circle out of the center so that really I'll only have that texture around the edges. Now I'm tearing little holes next throughout the background here because I want it to look very loose and stringy almost when I'm done. So here you can see what it looks like with the small holes torn into it. And now what I'm doing is adding a little water to my gesso to make it really nice and thin. And I'm actually going to paint the cheesecloth to the cover. This will adhere it nicely. Here I decided it's probably just easier just to dunk the whole thing into my liquefied gesso and just lay it on and then kind of adhere it by painting it. So it's a bit of a messy process, but it works. I just want to mention that throughout this process I am going to be telling you what products I'm using, but if you don't get it down right away, don't worry about it. I do have everything listed underneath the video, and I also have links, places you can buy it if you don't already have it. So now I'm ready to apply my stencil with some modeling paste to the cover. Here I'm using a stencil I designed for the Crafters Workshop called Mystical Tree. Unfortunately, I had the camera off when I was actually applying it, so you don't actually see me doing it, but next you will see me applying modeling paste and a stencil to the back cover. And in this case I'm going to be using Moving Vines, which is another stencil I made for the Crafters Workshop. So I just take the TCW modeling paste and I'm just applying it over the vines. So I'm just, the back I just want it to be pretty simple and flat with just a little bit of texture. So I'm putting on the vines, and then I'm also going to use a brick stencil for, I think it's Mini Bricks it's called, and that's by TCW as well. And as I mentioned, I'll provide links in the bottom description area underneath the video. Now, to add a little more interest to the corners on the front cover, I decided to use a Dusty Attic scroll. I believe this one is called scroll number 1. Dusty Attic is a little more available now in Canada. It's an Australian company, but if I can find a link to it, I will provide it in the description area below. One of my go-to adhesives for chipboard is this mono liquid adhesive. All you do is apply it to the back, let it dry till it's almost just tacky, and then attach it to your project. So now what I'm moving on to do here is I'm covering each of the chipboard pieces with some white gesso. I believe I either did 2 or 3 coats on there, but Even if some of the brown still shows through, that's okay because we're still adding coats of paint to it. We come to the fun part, the painting. Here I'm using a paint by Luminart called Silks, and the color is Wine and Roses. The paint itself was almost dried out in my container, so I had added a little bit of water to it, but if you get a new jar of it, it's much richer. And for the outside edges, I'm using, I'll just grab it here, another paint, acrylic paint Metallic Dark Velvet by Art Alchemy. Again, this one is done by Prima, and I'll provide links below. So the idea here is I want to go darker on the outside edges and kind of fade it into the middle color. It doesn't have to be a perfect fade because there's so much going on with the stencil and everything else on it after. But yeah, the idea is just dark on the outside, softer on the inside. So I decided I'd needed another layer of coloring on it, and so I resorted to Tainted Love Teal by Lindy's Stamp Gang. This is such a versatile color. I've used it on a number of projects. It's almost empty my bottle in time for a refill. But if you ever just, trying to figure out what paints to order, this one I really do like, and it's worked for so many projects. So now what I'm doing here is I'm just doing the same process as I did on the front onto the back, again with the darker purple on the outside and that sort of softer wine color on the inside, and then I'm going to add a little spritz of the teal as well and let it dry. One of my favorite ways to add a little more framework to my projects is to use this Tim Holtz Vintage Photo ink. So I'm just rubbing it along the edges. I know it tends to give a project a nice finished look. So now here I'm about to use one of my favorite new paints. It's Pinata Paint by Jacquard, and the color I'm using is Brass. It has such a rich shimmery look to it. It really, really stands out. So it's just one of my favorite paints to be using right now. So basically what I'm doing here is a technique called dry brushing. I just put my paintbrush into the paint, but keep it fairly light, not very heavy. And I just run my brush over all the relief areas on my project. So I brush it over the chipboard and the areas where I used the texture paste on my stencil. And what this does is bring the whole image forward. It really stands out. Sometimes we do journal covers with a whole lot of embellishments on it, and they're really quite beautiful, but at the same time maybe not the most convenient thing to be using. In this case I was using it to take notes, and so I just wanted a journal that's a little more flat. So I'm really only sticking to doing a little bit of stenciling on this cover, but I still want to get something with nice impact. So as far as embellishments go, there's not going to be too much more on here. And again, what I do to the front, I do to the back, and here I'm just going to hit all the relief areas of the stenciling with the gold paint. One thing I should mention is something I didn't notice until after when I was putting my book together, but I actually put the stencil on upside down. I wanted the vines hanging down, and so that the holes for the binding should really be on the right side. So if somebody is doing this project, just make sure that your board is sitting the right way. It doesn't look terrible having the vines going up, but it would have been my preference to have it look like this. Now for my final step, I'm adding these adhesive gems to little sections on the stencil where it looks like there would be like a little bud or a flower, usually around the leaf area. And that gives it a nice little sparkle, but without, having a lot of embellishment sitting on the cover. Now the back looks kind of messy from all the paints, etc. So what I like to do is put in a little bit of binding. So what I've taken is some cardstock here. I just, mark off the edges. I take my cutter, and then I'm just going to apply it with some adhesive. And I do that for the front and back cover. And then basically your project is done. And next here, I'm just showing you how I clip the whole thing back together. You just roll the cover on for each side, and your project looks beautiful and ready to use. I just want to thank everybody for the kind and wonderful feedback I've been getting. It really means a lot to me. And I also just wanted to let you know as well that all of the products I use are listed in the description below, and you can always click the links, or if I can find a link for you, I will. But at least I'll list all the products I use. Thanks again, and I hope to see you soon with another new project.